Our scripture reading for the gospel this morning is from Matthew, a portion of the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount only shows up in Matthew's gospel. In Matthew, mountains are a place of revelation. Matthew is very much part of a Jewish Christian community, and for him, the mount, like Mount Sinai, is a place where God is revealed. The teachings we hear today follow immediately on the heels of the Beatitudes, and they serve as a kind of transition between the Beatitudes and more specific teachings that will follow. In the Sermon on the Mount, it's possible, it's hard to say for certain, it's possible that the crowds that were there overhear this sermon, but we're explicitly told that Jesus invites the disciples. He goes up on the mountain and the disciples come to him and he sits down. Sitting was the pose of a rabbi who was teaching. And so Matthew here invites the church to sit at Jesus' feet and to learn from him what it means to be a part of this Jesus movement. And so let us listen now for what the Spirit may speak to us through these words. Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You never know, dear, how much I loved you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Now, for some reason, that song, or the words from that song, I'm not going to sing it, popped into my head when I was thinking about salt and light from the scripture passage. I was wondering specifically whether those words carry the sort of impact they did in Jesus' day. They're sort of mundane. I mean, turn on the light, somebody says, and we flip the switch. Light's everywhere. You can't see the stars very well at night in the DMV because there's so much light. As long as the power doesn't go out, we take it completely for granted, which may be why I thought of that song, Sunshine. You are my sunshine. That sounds impressive. I understand the metaphor of, you're the light of the world, but I don't know, sunshine just seems something so much grander. Salt, too. I mean, most of us get too much salt. Salt's not anything impressive. No one would ever give a box of salt to someone as an extravagant Valentine's gift. But in Jesus' day, and in the ancient world, salt very often was worth its weight in gold, literally worth its weight in gold. One of the the primary commodities of the ancient world. Salt was not only used to season food, but it was used to preserve it so it could be stored. It was used as an antiseptic. It was required in the offerings that were given at the Jerusalem temple. And in some areas of the ancient world, little slabs of rock salt were used as coins. Light was also precious. In a world of candles and torches, oil lamps were cutting-edge technology. And you had to go and buy oil to put in the lamp so you could use it. And so no one lit a lamp and covered it up with a basket. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Not something mundane, not something taken for granted, but precious, cherished, valuable, essential for life. As I said, Jesus' words are from the Sermon on the Mount, which began with the Beatitudes, which we heard last Sunday. And it goes on for a couple more chapters from where we are. The lectionary actually spreads the Sermon on the Mount out over 7 different Sundays. We take a single teaching and divide it into sevenths. I publish my sermons online, and I put printed copies of them out there in the hall. And so imagine that you picked one of those up and read the 5th and 6th paragraphs, and then tried to explain to somebody what the sermon was all about. That's sometimes what we do when we chop up the Sunday readings into manageable segments. I'm not sure we can really understand what Jesus is talking about when he speaks of salt and light, or when he talks about fulfilling the law or a righteousness exceeding that of the Pharisees, if we're not thinking about those strange beatitudes that Jesus has spoken immediately prior. The Beatitudes are not a guide to getting blessed, or worse, to becoming happy. Rather, they are the description of a new reality, one that does not conform to the ways of the world. Jesus rattles off a rather strange list of those who are blessed. It sounds a little like the list many of us would recite if we were asked to recount our blessings. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who long for a world that is set right, for the merciful, the pure in heart, for the peacemakers, for those who are persecuted for striving for what is right. Jesus is describing here the dynamics of God's kingdom, of a new and different reality. It is something vastly different from the world that imagines wealth and happiness and ease and not having to worry about much of anything is what it means to be blessed. In our reading today, Jesus provides something of a transition from this new reality he describes with the Beatitudes into the specific behaviors, that new way of living that Jesus expects of his followers. Detailed instructions will follow on everything from loving your enemies to the Lord's Prayer to the impossibility of serving both God and wealth. But our readings actually deal with some larger generalities. Now, as I mentioned, the Sermon on the Mount is explicitly described as teachings to the disciples. In Matthew's gospel, that's a literary device that he uses to have Jesus speak directly to the church, to sit at the feet of Jesus. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And the yous here are plural. Y'all are the salt of the earth, the light of the world. Modern people often individualize Christian faith, but Jesus calls into being a community that exists, at least in part, to draw the world into God's kingdom, into this new reality that Jesus proclaims. Now, Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. But a lot of the other rabbis, the Pharisees, did not expect their faith communities to engage the world. When Matthew's gospel is written, Judaism is a small minority under Roman rule. At one point, some Jews had decided to try and throw off that Roman rule, leading Rome to destroy Jerusalem, destroy the wonderful temple in 70 A.D. With priestly Judaism sidelined because there was no temple, Pharisaic or rabbinical Judaism became standard, normal Judaism. And faced with the impossible, the task of trying to resist Rome, of the futility of trying to resist the power of Rome, and struggling to understand how in the world it could be that God had allowed Rome to destroy the city of David and God's own temple, Judaism turned inward. The prophet Isaiah had spoken of Israel as a light to the nations. God's call to Abraham and Sarah had said that through them all the families of the earth would be blessed. But Israel scarcely existed. The best it could do was to hold on fast to its faith and to await God to act, to await the coming of God's kingdom. But Jesus insists that the reality of God's new day, the kingdom, has already begun to show up. And he calls his followers, his community that gathers around him, to bear witness, to be salt and light that start to shape the world for the new day that begins to break forth in the person of Jesus. This is not a break with Judaism, Jesus says. It is fulfillment of the law. Jesus expects his followers to honor the law every bit as much as the Pharisees. But Jesus understands the times very differently than the Pharisees do. And I wonder if when Jesus is here speaking to the church, his words might not be particularly appropriate and meaningful in our time. In a time when the church has lost much of its former prestige and clout and influence in the world. You know, our denomination still likes to make grand official statements about global warming and immigration policy and on and on and on. A practice that began when we used to be an important voice in the public square. Nowadays, pretty much no one pays any attention to us. Maybe the best thing we can do would be to hunker down and study our Bibles. We can't change the world. We can't do that. We're just trying to survive. And yet Jesus speaks to Matthew's congregation, a tiny church with no prestige, no influence at all, and says, you are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. This past Wednesday, and on every first and third Wednesday of the month, people who are poor, some who are struggling with mental illness, addiction, some who are homeless, some who are immigrants, some who just don't quite have enough to get by, gather in our fellowship hall for a meal. Other people, most of them well off, good jobs, nice homes, wait tables, serve food, clean up spills, empty trash cans, work in the kitchen, hug people they've grown to know. And I'm often struck with the upside-down nature of it all, and wonder if it doesn't look just a little bit like the upside-down world, the upside-down new reality that Jesus proclaims. I've also noticed that we have a fair number of non-members who come and serve and help, do various things to help create this new upside-down reality. You, that's you plural, y'all, are the salt of the earth, the light of the world. You are precious, valued, cherished, beloved, essential for life. And so Jesus calls you to bear witness to the hope of a new reality, a new day. And when we go with Jesus, when we follow where he leads, the light shines. And the darkness recedes just a bit more. Thanks be to God.